later on your own time. Um, the intention for tonight is to gather some um, therapists, counselors, educators, some insightful folk, some cultural workers, some artists to help us individually and collectively process lots of the loss that we are experiencing in this moment. Um, we got folk on the line from around the world. I see some of y'all checking in from Jamaica and Puerto Rico and California and all over. And we are experiencing a collective worldwide grief in this moment for lots of different reasons. I think people are feeling it in different ways and it is expressing it and it's showing up in different for different reasons. But I think there's something that we all share, particularly for those that after a long day of work decided to tune into a webinar about grief, that people are coming for a reason. Um, and I do think that the reason that people come is because they are aligned with and attuned with the amount of sadness that is going on in this world right now and are looking for ways to process it, a community to build around solutions for that, and to just spaces to just be and to acknowledge it, accept it, and um, just have that be a part of what is our reality in this moment. But also to hopefully find some ways to get through, to learn from, to find clarity within it. So the panelists that we invited today, we all had this conversation in the spring, and I was just so inspired by them and impressed by them and moved by them, and I learned so much from them that we just decided to have the conversation again in the fall. Um, Things have changed in the last couple of months since we all met together, so we will process some of those developments around the world and the country and otherwise. But it's also a really powerful, heavy, transformative time of the year. The fall is very rich for a lot of people, good, bad, and ugly. I know that holidays are times for celebration, but they can also be times for mourning. There are times when we look around the table and it really hits us that grandma not coming back for real. That our family members, our friends that we look forward to seeing around this time won't be at the table or at the gathering this year. So holidays for that are really representative of a time to seek more community and comfort. But it's also a time spiritually that I learned from studying African traditional systems that this is a time of year when the veil is thinner between the spirit world and the human world, the physical and um, uh, the ancestral realms. And so in that time, there are opportunities for us to tap in and a little bit differently. It is also means that sort of the spirits that are benevolent, and beneficial have easier access to us. So we have to think carefully about the spiritual technologies and tools and access we have to allowing ourselves to be overcome with these spirits of sadness, depression, of anxiety, addiction, and to seek community in times and to counsel each other through the wisdom of our cultural traditions because we have increased access to the wisdom of our ancestry in this moment. And so I'm glad we got to reconvene in the fall for those reasons. And with that, I would like to kind of introduce the conversation. I'm going to ease us into it. Um, but I'm really excited to hear from our guests tonight. They are speaking from very different traditions and perspectives, but there's lots of common themes that you'll see emerge through our cultural excavations of our memory and looking for tools to help us process, grieve, forgive, to restore, and all the things that we tonight are gathered to do together. So I am going to share some slides briefly, just for me to help get grounded in this conversation. Um, I wanted to make it very clear that my role today is curating and moderating is not from the position of a professional. Um, I greet you, I sit with you, I'm in community with you tonight as a human being who is traveling a journey that is full of ebbs and flows and ups and downs and lights and darks, and I'm trying to figure it out, just like everyone else is. And there were things that I did learn in my professional journey. My degrees, clinical community psychology, and there was some stuff I learned about grief, the stages and cycles of grief and mourning process. But most of what has been most useful to me in my life have been things that have been coming from my elders that have I've learned from studying indigenous traditions, that I've learned from just the lived experience of falling and getting up. And so I'm coming tonight to facilitate this conversation as Obari, not Dr. Cartman, um, as a son, as a grandson, and as a father who is having to raise children in a time when I remember before I had kids that I was nervous about bringing children into this world. This was my oldest son is 12, and I had those conversations with my friends like, I don't know if this is the world is a good time to bring children into. Like I feel like we kind of at a low point in the cycle, and I guess there was parts of me that were not hopeful about things getting better sooner, and worried about the world my children and my grandchildren, if my children have children, would inherit. Um, so that's how I come. That's the position that I enter this conversation from. And I was taught by my community, my parents and my elders, that when you have important gatherings such as this, that you want to begin in proper order. Um, First, by asking if some of the elders that might be on this call tonight, my personal or the community elders, could give me permission to begin, so that I can have some the authority of my ancestry and the living elders that represent the wisdom keepers. Can I have permission from my elders to begin this program?
You have permission from me, April Gary.
Thank you. And the other thing, protocol wise, that I was taught to do when we have important gatherings is to do a form of libation. And there's different ways to think about it. And some programs just start with a moment of silence just to acknowledge those sort of entities, spirits, beings, ancestors that are no longer with us physically, but we want to invite to be a part of the conversation because they bring a level of insight that um, our our physical bodies have limits to understand. Um, and so to do a libation, virtually, I wanted to invite my father, who is no longer with us, to do a snippet of a libation just to hear his voice. It calms me down and it reminds me of sort of my place in the cycles of life. And so I wanted to begin with my father's voice as he was performing a ritual libation for our family in Houston. This had to be 20 years ago. Is my volume on? Can y'all hear him?
No.
Can't hear.
Let me make sure I click that sound button. Okay. Libation is like a ritual thing where you honor your ancestors. You hear now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
We can remember our past ancestors getting to where we are here today. So this is in memory of our ancestors. That's what the libation is for. So when I say soy, that means you agree with what I'm saying and in tribute of our ancestors. And so you customarily name like the Hannibals, the Marcus Garveys, Malcolm X's, Fannie Lou Hamer's, Charles Evans, um, Martin Luther King, Ernestine Kennedy, Adler Cartman Sr., James Lee, Bob Marley, all the ancestors passed before and made it what we are today. So we're going to pour libation into this planet here. So as we begin the conversation, would like you to think about some of the ancestors, some of your family lineage, some of the cultural warriors who've inspired you to think about them, to invite them to wherever you are, consider whatever you are tuning in from sacred space. We're not in the same room, but we all still connected vibrationally. So my father is, he taught us that when we invite our ancestors into the space, it gives us a connection to eternity. My parents and then my children become like my link to forever before and forever ahead. And it's important to me to think about what I'm doing simultaneously when I talk about my father, because it also prepares my children to think about that cycle when prayerfully, if all goes as planned, by design, hopefully, that I leave before they do. And when I leave, they will have remembrances of how I processed my father's loss by the way they see me honor him in real time. And so that becomes sort of the process of like how I think in my family, what do I do with the loss, but also how do I teach the conceptualization of life and death cycles just by what happens in our house. My father drowned. I was 25. This is almost 20 years ago. So it was a sudden loss. I was in Atlanta. Got a call from my older brother, and my life changed very dramatically since then. And it, you know, triggered a string of losses in my life that I'm still recovering from, and it included loss of, you know, reputation and hope and identity, and it started into other cycles that meant other traumatic things that came into my life, which turned into loss of close friends and family. So when I think about my father in that moment that day when we lost him, um, helps me remember really the gravity of the time that we have with each other. Um, and it helps me sort of learn to think about how to, for myself, process loss and grief in a way that ends in a deeper appreciation and gratitude for life. Um, One of the other strings that was a ripple effect of my father drowning was my mother developing soon after a dementia. She's still alive, but if anyone has had families with Alzheimer's or dementia, you get to experience a very tedious loss, a very sort of piece by piece, bit by bit loss of the person that you knew. And then, I still consider my mother alive, but in a different way. Um, so after losing my father, and then in some ways still feeling like I lost my mother, my older sister during COVID passed, and it wasn't from COVID, but it was a similarly sudden loss. It came to the house one day on Friday, and then Saturday wasn't answering the calls, and Sunday went to the house and saw a body on the ground. So um, loss has shaped my world in ways. I just got a text on Saturday from my little sister with terrible news that my 12-year-old niece, Kai, this is memories that I will always cherish of me taking pictures of her in the park when she was a baby. But we found out last week that she had an asthma attack that turned into brain loss that they decided she would not recover from on Saturday. So we are still trying to figure out what that even means and like what that looks like and how to make sense of all of this. So loss has shaped my life. Uh, Grief has carved a path like a river through a mountain in my world in ways that I don't even know who I would be without it. So again, I enter this conversation from that perspective. This is an image of my Babalawo Baba Ason. He was the person who I credit with teaching me some of the secret science and technology of the spiritual understandings of our ancestors through the system called Ifa, the Yoruba system. If you have heard of the Orishas or expressions of that through Candomblé or Lukumi or Santeria, that was a system that I began to study some years ago. And, just digging through the archives of our ancestry has given me lots of insight into life, death cycles, into heaven and earth into our place and our purpose, and how to tap into sort of a spiritual technology that was so powerful for us that we had an adversary that did everything it could to take our drums and our rituals and our language away. And so I've been fortunate enough to retrace some of those steps through being a student of Baba Ason and a student of African traditions until he passed from heart disease about 6 or 7 years ago. Um, and that loss sort of shook me in a way that again, I'm still recovering from, still trying to continue my journey into the tradition without someone that I consider to be as powerful as a guide as he was, at least from this plane. Next to him is a family friend, my brother's best friend, Ajibawo, who died by suicide a couple of years ago. Um, and so, again, when I say this isn't a professional conversation for me, I mean it. This is a very personal, ongoing journey for me to think about how loss still lives in my heart, in my chest. It shapes my world in ways that is continues to be breathtaking sometimes, but also all in all of the lessons that I've learned and the gratitude that I have on the other side of the grieving process that has given me, you know, I don't know who I would be without it, but the gift is that I like who I am. And so it's the double-edged swords of challenges in life and the obstacles that craft us that, like, you know we learn things, we get a level of strength from those experiences that are irreplaceable. So one of the things that because I was a student of African traditions, that helped me to understand how our ancestors processed grief and life cycles, and I'm able to see our traditions everywhere. I'm able to see the connections between how African ancestors sort of taught and preserved cultural wisdoms that helped us understand loss and grief and life and purpose. So when I see, brothers in the South Side of Chicago pouring liquor and pouring libations and creating altars, I see the remnants. I see the lasting memory that, despite opposition with trying to erase a people and identity, that there's still aspects of us that have always held on to and understood who we are and how we connect to life beyond the physical form. So when I see, mass community shrines created like after the murder of George Floyd, I have a deeper understanding of that just because of my studies in African systems. And so part of why I'm excited about this conversation is because we get to see some of these linkages between how African ancestors understood life and death, and how that transfers and how it's connected to the stories, the narratives, the conceptualization that we see in indigenous people around the world. Um, and some of the times I do feel some frustration about the trauma that had happened to Black folk, particularly those of us in the States, in the removing the distancing of ourselves from our traditions. And so when I have to teach my sons the things that I learned from Baba Ason and the things that we're doing in the house, and when I show them, what does it mean to make offerings, it's hard to sometimes find spaces in the Black community that reinforce those lessons. And so I do have to look at what does it mean, we in Pilsen in this moment in a public library, taking them to an ofrenda, right? So there's ways that other cultures have preserved their understanding of loss and life and death in ways that are represented in movies like Coco. And so when we watch Coco, I get to say this is some of the same stuff that we also do in our traditions. We don't have necessarily the same access commercially as you saw in the altars that were very prominently displayed in movies like Shang-Chi from the Asian perspective. But because I had a sort of a groundedness and a conceptualization that it helped me not just think about how to grieve through breathing exercises or journaling or the things that I got from like the Western perspective of psychology. Like I learned processes, but it was through study and connection and through eldership that I got to help understand the framework for how to make sense of all these things that has really just been an anchor for me that I'm excited to be able to share some of tonight and look at some of those linkages.
这是外
This is
公
from
的
that
手
movie
艺。
Shang-Chi, Shang-Chi.
今年清明节，我准备给他最喜欢的东西。
Are you sure that Waigong's allowed to take Funyuns and cigarettes back to the afterlife?
他什么都可以收。去年我在他的坟前放了一瓶白酒，第二天没了。我知道你们觉得我很傻。
We don't think it's silly, Wai Pa. We just know Waigong would have wanted you to move on and enjoy your life.
Moving on is an American idea.
You're American, Mom. Don't forget.
这是外公的祖。
So that's where I want us to go from here, really, is to think about what does it mean for us personally, collectively, culturally, to be in a world with so many reasons to grieve, so much things that we have lost personally, collectively, and to try to piece together from our cultural studies, from our individual and collective perspectives, a way to make sense of it, to make meaning out of it, to thrive despite it, because it, to find personal and community strength in the midst of it all. And that's something that I don't think that any of us individually could do without creating community support. So even though we own Zoom, I still believe that we can do that in a very intimate and meaningful way. So I'm excited that you all are here, see the vision for this, and will participate by bringing your own sort of collective cultural wisdoms, your own ancestral insights, and your own personal experiences to a conversation that helps us all leave this moment in time a little bit clearer and a little bit more compassionate, but also able to keep going, because the point is to just learn, right? Learn to keep going. So I would like to invite Sister Yada to share some remarks. I learned about her work a few years ago when I saw her here in Chicago doing free support circles for the Palestinian community um, in the midst of the one of the greatest tragedies we've ever personally had to witness, right? And I think that there's a worldwide collective grief around what's going on in Gaza that has, I'll say personally, has created a level of helplessness and guilt for complicity and just sadness that sometimes I feel bad for not even being able to tune into. Like it's so hard to watch it that sometimes I have to turn it off. But it's still happening, like right now, still happening. And so I wanted to ask her to help us sort of give us some context around some of that work that you're doing, some of the ways to help us understand how to make sense of that, make meaning of it, and to grieve, but also to one of the reasons I love you so much is because you are helping us process it, but also fighting and activating us and organizing us to do the work to help us not just be sad about it, but to change it, to stop it. So uh, please, I don't want to shape what remarks. Just, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you. Peace, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Yara. I am a Palestinian American woman from Chicago. I am a Palestinian from the diaspora. My parents are both refugees, sought refuge here in the US in their 20s, and raised me and my two younger sisters in Chicago. I did not choose to be a therapist. I have my master's in clinical therapy. Like my ancestors had led me to become a therapist and then dismantle white supremacy through the therapy lens. There's a lot of things in Western psychology that when I was in class and learning that didn't sit right with me, which led me into my title now, which I prefer to call myself a healer, and having sort of a spiritual awakening, I guess, a few years ago, which kind of led me back onto my path. And I bring this up, I talk about this to begin with to let you in on like who I am, to understand my journey as a Palestinian woman and what I do. And one of the biggest parts of grief does not begin with the masses of lives that have been lost in Palestine, but what white supremacy has done to rip us away from our culture. and my people. And unfortunately, there was so much interpersonal challenges that I had growing up within my community. I grew up in Little Palestine, which is in the south suburbs of Chicago. It's technically called Bridgeview, but it's culturally coined Little Palestine because when you go there, it literally feels like you're in Palestine. And there was a lot of interpersonal challenges that I had with my people. And it got to the point where I just completely disconnected. A lot of racism, a lot of homophobia, a lot of anti Blackness, a lot of sexism, a lot of misogyny. And I fought it for so long that I just attributed it to my people. And I was like, I don't want to be around this. And I kind of fled in a way. Found my space in the south side of Chicago with great community. And that led me into my world of becoming a therapist. And then from my therapy into working on myself as a human and spiritually, which led me into becoming the healer that I am today. From that, I started working with clients, and the genocide last year began on October 7th. Now, when this happened, I was like, okay, disconnected from my community, doing this work as a clinician. What am I going to do? Like, I'm Palestinian at the end of the day. Like, I need to do something for my people. I put a post up on Instagram and I was like, free counseling for Palestinians. No big deal. Went to sleep. I was like, some people will reach out. Woke up to the Gigi and Bella Hadid sisters reposting me, and I had thousands of people in my messages. And I was like, okay. I like literally looked up and I was like, all right, God, okay, universe, got it. This is it. Like this is what you prepared me for. I like just felt it. So started doing free session, free session, free session, free session, free session, and all this. And I say free because there's a lot of energy that goes into doing this type of stuff in a capitalistic society. Like, and I have no shame of saying that. Like, it's working my 9 to 5 in a really unhealthy job, which thankfully I'm out of. And I was giving so much of myself away, and I didn't know how to make this balance. I didn't know. I'm like, oh yeah, this person needs to talk to me about their grief. They need to talk to me about how they're feeling about the genocide. They need to tell me about the 15 family members that they just lost in one night. They have to tell me about also what's happening at work with their racist boss that's saying the things that they're saying. Like, and I'm just like, I'm survival mode, right? I'm just like, okay, this is what you say, this is how you respond, this is how you active listen, this is what I was taught. And I was completely depleted. Depleted. My partner was just at the time he was telling me like he didn't even want me to hug him. He was just like after my sessions, he was like, "No, you need to go cleanse or something. There's so much energy on you." And I noticed that it was like kind of eating away at me. I had to let go, release. And I took a break for a while. And in that break, um, God kind of put me into this like isolation mode. And if you're a spiritual person, whatever religion, non religion, whatever you follow, you know that there's a moment where you have to be put away, where you are forced to face certain things until you're able to kind of like, it's like you're being pulled back like a slingshot, and then you're going to be propelled and kind of like quantum leap into like your next phase, right? You needed to be, all the downloads need to come to you before you can continue. And I remember meeting a Palestinian brother who brought me back into the community. He was like, why don't you come to a protest? And I was like, I'm going to get overstimulated. Like, I love my people and I want to show out and all the things. But slowly, they just kept inviting me to spaces little by little. And I started going back in and I started meeting more of my Palestinian community. And I had to learn how to release the triggers that stopped me from being in those spaces and recognize that the demons or the however like the unhealthy parts of people that are showing up do not necessarily belong to them, but belong to the system that has traumatized us to keep us apart. And my movement now with my company brand, whatever, I don't care what it's called, but Healers Collective is true liberation comes from complete freedom. Freedom from mental, emotional, but also financial, and anything that the system places on us, the oppressions that we're under. It's liberating ourselves, coming back to one another, to come back to Palestine, to full freedom, to full liberation. And I had to come back to myself to be able to come back to my people, to do the work that I'm doing now, to heal the soldiers within my community that are processing so much of the grief. I could have been there and talked about, well, Arab men this and Arab men that. And I was on that for a long time until I was like, all right, well, these are our soldiers that are being attacked in certain ways that we need to release them from to be able to process this collective pain that we're going through by the enemy, the oppressor, whatever it is that this dark demonic force that we're all under collectively. And this just doesn't go for Palestine, but this goes for Congo, this goes for Sudan. It's literally all attached. It's so systemically intertwined. It's like, and the number one way is to try to divide us. Now I say this whole thing, you're like, okay, well, where does the grief come in? I think I needed to talk about that background to bring you to how I view grief. When we talk about death, I'm not a believer of death as an ending. I think energies recycle, and the energies, the people, the spirits that have passed from the millions of ancestors of ours, the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been brutally murdered, their souls pass and will come back again. I don't see them. They have passed for a greater purpose. And I think that is where my grief lies, in maybe my humanness sees it as like painful, where I'm like, okay, well, I wish they got to have a full life. I wish they, but what does that mean? Who am I to say what a full life is? What if their life, their destiny, whatever was written for them, was for the greater purpose to awaken the world? Welcome to New Earth. We're in it. This is beautiful. If you're, into astrology, I can get into that a little bit too, as to like what this realm is that we're in right now, but we're entering into a new space, and we have to grieve this old world where the oppressor has been in charge, has been in power for so long, for all of our ancestral spirits from so many different backgrounds to come together and grow and tap into our abilities, and tap into our intuition, and tap into, like Obari was speaking about, connecting with our ancestors and inviting them into spaces. My ancestors forced me to contact them. I grew up Muslim, and my mother, she's very, very like religious, but she's the type of religious where she kind of omits spirituality from the religion. And but she's always been the type of person who will like boil cinnamon, or like she'll have like incense going. I'll be like, Mama, like, what is this? And she's like, it's just for the smell. And I'm like, okay, like I know intuitively, like those are the ancestors speaking and working through her. Like we don't lose that. Like it's the cells that existed within my great 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 grandmother. Like we were within her at one moment, and though that energy gets passed down all the way through, and it recycles, it continues to recycle. and I see a greater purpose. Dealing with grief for me is this framework, that this ideology that I'm speaking to you as. I see the purpose in the reason why these energies are being recycled and what each specific energy comes to us and teaches us. The In Gaza, there's a group of kids that I was recently introduced to that do parkour on like the ruins of buildings. And like, can you imagine what type of message that speaks to the strength and the kind of like, excuse my language, but like well, I'll just say the FU energy type, like where it's like, okay, keep trying to kill us. Look at our spirits. Like, look, the Ghazan children who are literally doing depka, which is the traditional dance, involves a lot of like step and stomping, and it's beautiful. And each tribe has specific footwork, and it's very spiritual. It's something that definitely you should check out if you haven't heard of it. They continue to do depka. They continue to sing songs that have continued being passed down from generation to generation. Grief for Palestinians, I've noticed they have taught me, my people have taught me, they have brought me back to myself by recognizing our true power and recognizing that no matter how gruesome or how disgusting the enemy tries to invoke their suffering upon us, our power and our magic is always greater. And I don't want to speak for too long, so I'll stop there. But I do want to share, I was going to share the screen, but it doesn't feel good now for whatever reason. So I'm just going to drop the link to my website. It's called Healers Collective. If you'd like to connect, if any of this touched you, if you'd like to get in contact, please do. Thank you for listening to me and allowing me to be vulnerable and share in this space. I appreciate everyone here.
Thank you so very much for that. I want to ask you one quick question before you just continue. What can we do? Is there something that we can do? Is there anything that we can do right now?
I appreciate that. Honestly, I think it's the greatest thing that we can do for one another is the work that we do for ourselves first and foremost. And I think doing things like this is great. Bringing us together is so important. It's very minimal spaces where I find different groups of people coming together. So I think making conversation, reaching out, introducing, talking, and connecting, that's the one thing that the enemy uses against us, is trying to tear us apart. Look at with the whole election situation and how people are going against each other. And it's like, isn't that exactly what they wanted? I remember last year, there was an article that was saying one of the worst things that was happening to the government was Black TikTok supporting Palestine. And now there's a disconnect between Black and Palestinian communities. And it's kind of like, I wonder why. So my biggest thing is like, definitely hold people accountable personally, who they are, because nobody's perfect. But also share space with different people and learn from them and grow with them and heal with them. Because ultimately, as a collective, that's where liberation, where it's together. My liberation does not, Palestinian liberation does not come without Natives liberation, without Black liberation. It's all tied together.
Love it. Thank you. I was about to say, you watch out. I didn't know if that cat belonged to you. I didn't know if you were in danger, but it looks
She
like
heard liberation and she was like, I'm with
nice.
it.
No, thank you. And if people have questions, please, reach out to her directly. We might have a little time for some Q&A afterwards, but probably not actually. So I'm gonna go on to Isayo. I know he has to leave soon too. So welcome, Isayo. Thanks again for coming back. I loved your presentation last time. Looking forward to hearing some more.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen. I have some visuals that I hope you all can appreciate. I'm a very visual person. Um, Let me know if you all can see the screen.
Yep, we see it.
All right.
Yeah.
So hello, everyone. My name is Isayo Tilmatsin, or Isayo. I am a first generation American born from Mexican parents who migrated to Chicago. I lead an indigenous community that's based in Chicago, where we practice the Nahua tradition that comes from central Mexico. I am an artist, cultural educator, and I work to preserve the indigenous traditions that have been for the past 500 years in this period of oppression, right, through settler colonialism. So my work tries to reclaim ancient rituals and this ancestral wisdom that I hope to share with you all today. Um, as indigenous people, our recent history, right, these last 500 years have been one of collective grief, experiencing discrimination, right, through the European settler colonialism of our land, right? The the taking of our land and then the forced assimilation to a foreign culture and a different religious system. Um, and through the indigenous lens, right, we tend to strengthen our connection with the natural world and learn what the natural world has to teach us, learning about the cycles of nature, the way in which life emerges, grows, flourishes, and then winds down. And then there's a moment of rest, and then this eventual metaphorical and sometimes literal death that we experience during the winter season, right? So as indigenous people, we see ourselves reflected in nature, right? Learning from all of our relatives, um, and um, and through these cycles of nature, learning how um, we as people, as being reflections of the natural change, uh, uh, in the same way that the earth is reborn each spring, then grows during summer, uh, and then there is the fall, right, where we see the change of color, and then the end of the harvest season, and then winter symbolizing death. Um, we learn, right, from these cycles that in our own personal life, we also get to experience. And then learning more from the elements we learn from water, right? Especially, let's, for example, from a moving river, right? The fluidity of the river for us is a metaphor for the flow of emotions. So what we can learn from water, just like everything else, is incredibly important. Water for us it was our first mirror, right? It's the one that reminded us who who we are, and it teaches us how to be adaptable regardless of the circumstance, right? And it's also a reminder of the importance of movement, right? Since water, when it is stale, becomes toxic, and it's not just toxic to itself, right? But because it's part of a larger ecosystem, this sort of stagnant water then becomes toxic for the surrounding environment. Um, so uh, it's always advised, right, that if you're feeling some sort of grief and sadness, to go by the water, go by a flowing river, to allow the water to ground you to the vibration of the earth, to teach you these lessons of adaptability and just flow. Um, in our philosophy, I mean, we have life and death right next to each other, like we see in this image on top. This is part of an ancient codex, or this ancient book that's over 600 years old, that show how life to the right and then death to the left both share this sort of same spine, right? They're both two sides of the same coin. Um, Here we see another image from another book that also shares this duality of life. We inhale life, we exhale death. When we're awake, we're in this conscious life. When we go to sleep, we enter into this dream world, this unconscious self. And just to show how there's sculptures in our tradition, right, that showcase this life and death duality. How in front of us we have life, the way that we decide to walk it, but right behind us we carry death. Right, this is the backside of that sculpture that's over 800 years old. And then to the right we see this face, right, that's again making reference to this duality. One of our traditions is this sort of ritual weeping that's done in community. Um, it's a very powerful ritual in which we get to channel, right, these emotions that sometimes we keep to ourselves in these sort of private settings in our bedroom, in our homes. But in our ceremonies, we do it in community. We do it as a form of a public ritual where we get to share our emotions, our feelings with others. Um, and this is a very important ceremonies that we do that is tied to our calendar system, in which we take 2 full months to honor and to acknowledge people who have passed. Um, in our calendar system, we have 18 months. Each month is has 20 days in it. So for 40 days, right? Because it's a 2 month sort of ceremony. These 40 days are there to honor the memory of our loved ones. And this is an ancient practice that goes back hundreds of years, that uh, um, has now become a sort of mainstream practice, or is slowly entering into the mainstream through the Day of the Dead celebrations. But it's important to note that Day of the Dead, the way that it stands now, with those particular dates of November 1st and 2nd, that's 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 part of the colonialism that our indigenous traditions have unfortunately suffered, right? Because we went from 40 days down to 2 days only. For us, the first month, the first 20 days were dedicated to mourning the loss of children. So for our ceremony this past August, we had a ceremony that was dedicated to the children of Palestine, more specifically, in which our whole ceremony was an offering to them. And then for the next month, for the next 20 days, that's when we get to honor, acknowledge, and do our offerings for the adults that have passed away. So it's a total of 40 days, right? But unfortunately, right, as this European invasion into the Americas, the Catholic Church, which became the leading institution, designated only 2 days for us to do our initial 40 days for of remembrance. And I mean, it's important for us to understand the origin of Day of the Dead, especially as it becomes more and more mainstream. Um, uh, because there is something so special about it that the whole world is learning from this Mexican tradition, right? We're able to differentiate between a Mexican skull and a non-Mexican skull very easily, because in our tradition we tend to decorate it and just fill it with color, right? So here we see some of these beautiful offerings that we do during these 2 months, in which we of course lay out the altar. We fill it with flowers. For us, the flower is one of the most important items in an altar, because it represents the completion of a cycle. In order for a flower to fully blossom, it needs the right soil, the right care with the water, the right light, the right air quality. It takes a whole ecosystem for a flower to blossom. And for us, it's a symbol of maturity. It's a symbol of that completion of a cycle. So that's why when I mean, even now in our society, when someone graduates, when someone gets married, even in someone's funeral, there's always going to be the symbol of the flower there as being one of the most important ones. And then part of our actual rituals that honor the dead include the cutting down of a tree, and then in it we place these paper offerings in which we write messages to our loved ones that have passed, right? So as another way for us to to continue this interaction with their memory. For us, each person that passes, um, it it uh it requires 4 years of offerings, because for us 4 years is what it takes for a person's essence to reintegrate and then to return to the place of duality. Um, so the offerings are very important for those 4 years, right? This is a cemetery in Mexico during the Day of the Dead celebrations, right? So the lighting of candles, the leading behind this, like the plate of food, drinks, playing music, the incense, This is something that's very important in our tradition for us to continue to process grief and loss. And it's a very colorful celebration, right? It's also a celebration of life. Yes, there's a somber feeling. There's a lot of space for for crying, but there's also space for dance. There's also space for songs. We have another ceremony that we conduct every 29 days, every full moon, which is called Temazcal, or it's a sweat lodge ceremony, in which we heat up stones in a fire and then we place them in the middle of the structure. We cover the structure and then pour water over the stones, and it creates this vapor. And we're in complete darkness, and it's a purification ceremony. And we do it every full moon because for us the full moon is the perfect time for us to release. So the main theme of the ceremony when we go in there is, what do we want to let go of? What do we want to keep processing, renew? What part of ourselves do we want to shed? And in there with the sweat, right? And with this intention, we get to attempt this release. And it's a very special ceremony that we do every 29 days. Um, and it's an ideal space for us to process grief. There's a lot of preparation that leads up to it. There's a lot of aftercare that is also involved in it, where you continue to work with what you have just released in that in this very sacred structure. For us, this is our mother's womb. We enter there in order to be regestated. We're entering this gestation period and attempting to be reborn. So when we come out, it's as if we are a renewed being. We are renewing ourselves. And then it's also important to mention for us, there's four flavors of life. The sour flavor represents metaphorically, right? It represents new experiences, taking risks, being adventurous, things that awaken our sensorial perception. And then we have the bitter flavor, which represents uh, feelings of grief, of loss, of sadness. And we have the salty flavor, which intensifies the previous two flavors. And it is what gives us wisdom from the lessons that we learned from the new experiences and then from the feelings of loss. And then we have the sweet flavor that comes at the end, which are these feelings of gratitude, of connection with community, with family, friendships. And it's important for us to understand that these flavors on their own, like the bitter flavor that we're talking about today, they're intense on their own. They're hard to deal with on their own. But when we recognize and acknowledge that there's other flavors that make up what life is, then they don't become so intense, right? We get to understand that all of these flavors uh, they all get to get put into the this mortar and pestle that we see here. In order to make something flavorful, these four flavors have to be present, right? So this special acknowledgement of the flavors always gets um, there's always a reminder of these flavors in very important ceremonies. When someone gets their indigenous name, when a couple gets married, they're always reminded, right, to look at the bigger picture of these four flavors, right? And each one of them has lessons to teach, right? But altogether, that's these flavors make up the actual flavors of life, right? Um, and that's all that I have today, so that I don't have to, so that I don't take up too much time. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Isayo. Really beautiful and brilliant. Um, I have one question for you too. Um, I showed an image earlier of me taking my kids to a Dia de los Muertos ceremony and some of the frustrations I have. I'm curious about some of those dynamics in the Mexican community around wrestling with what you're doing, which is recovering traditions, and what the pressure of this system does, which is to move away from them, to assimilate. And I know, one of the things that I see from the outside is that it seems like there's more pride, right? We jealous of y'all Mexican Independence Day, but we wish we could get, so we'd be annoyed we in traffic, but like we kind of wish we could in mass celebrate like y'all do. Um, but what we have to deal with is a lot of the demonization of death. All the things that we're talking about, people might say that you on some voodoo shit, like that's some devil worship. That we move away from it. And our next presenter is going to talk about voodoo in a way that helps us sort of like reconceptualize that. But she's doing it against the pressure of the family traditions, which are saying leave that stuff alone, hide it, be more. Proximity to whiteness becomes the version of success that helps you, achieve and to thrive and all that. I'm curious about that dynamic in your communities. Do you see people struggling with that? Are they embracing you and saying, "Give me more"? Or are they saying, "No, I don't want that. That's too deep. Like the 2 days was enough. Like this, we satisfied with that." Is there a struggle there internally or ideologically?
I mean, there is definitely a struggle, right? I mean, there is a difference between indigenous Mexico and the non-indigenous Mexico, even though most of the population is indigenous, to some degree. But because of this long colonial history, there's always a sort of sentiment that indigenous tradition is something of the past, something that needs to be overcame, right? So when we tell people that we're doing the 2 month acknowledgement of the dead, people are more inclined to participate in the Day of the Dead that goes in November, right? They're not interested in the reclaiming of it because of the societal pressure of it being moved. Because for us, these 2 months fall between August and mid-September. So then there is that gap. There is that gap of mid-September to then November, which is a month and a half away. So people are not inclined to celebrate in August, right? But for us, that we're in the middle, it seems like we have like 4.5 months to grieve. If anything, it's even different from the way that it used to be practiced in ancestral times when it was just 40 days. Because for us, we have the 40 days, and now we have the November 1st and 2nd Day of the Dead celebration that we have to then include. Um, but with more education, I feel more people are more open to learn about these ancestral traditions. And many Mexican people don't know this. They don't know that there used to
Mhm.
be a 40-day celebration because, again, there are this sort of this colonial mind state that they're trying to move away from their indigeneity. It's still very
Mhm.
strong and present. But because we are here, Mexican Americans, for the most part, we're so separated from our land that us reconnecting, reclaiming is a huge sense of pride that makes us want to dig deeper because of that separation. So we're a different type of Mexican, right? Because we're stuck in the middle. We
Mhm.
go to Mexico, we're not Mexican enough. We're here, we're not American enough.
Mhm.
But we're navigating these two worlds.
Mhm. Very interesting. Thank you so for very very much. I also know that you do this, so you got a class at 7:30 that you teach. So please follow him and stay connected. He's always doing stuff. So if y'all want to learn more, he has a wealth of resources. But if y'all have personal questions for him, please feel free to inbox him or DM him while he's here for the next 20 or so minutes. And
Thank you.
thank you again so very very much. Um, One of the things that I learned from my Babalawo, my sort of spiritual leader, before he passed, was again the spiritual power of this time. And ever since I learned about some of those ancient traditions, I experienced things like Halloween, for example, very differently. And he taught us about like some of the perversion of the commercial holidays, but at the essence, there were things underneath them. There were sort of ritual practices that we should take very seriously. For example, we talked about that time, the time of year, which is around the same time of the Dia de los Muertos, but it also meant that we had to do more to protect ourselves from sort of evil, sort of harmful spirits, and so that the masking, for example, worked kind of like a gargoyle. So we see him as like it's just like a game to play, but it came from a time when we would play with masquerades to ward off evil spirits. And we do the candy exchange, but he'd explain that as an offering that you leave an offering, a turnip or something that some tradition used to use, or a pumpkin. So we carved the pumpkin like a toy, but like he was saying that we give candy and sweets to spirits like Gede, who is the son of Oya, and talked about some of the rituals embedded in sort of like the public version of it, but do we need to think about the connection to some of the ancient sort of wisdom of that? And so I say that as a transition to Maja's presentation, who I saw a clip of your slides last time we did this. You were speaking more as a counselor. I think that you realized what we needed, which is speak more about the Vodun tradition and some of the spirits and wisdom that come from that. That I think has been some of the most specifically demonized and distanced
Yeah.
from the Black American experience. So I'm very excited to have you sort of share from that perspective how you see life, death, how you preserving some of the wisdom and traditions, and how that works in your work as a counselor.
Yeah.
My-
Can you hear me?
yes, yes.
I'm going to share a slide, but at the same time, I want to honor time and space that we have allotted for this. And like you just said, this is against a lot of things that is traditional, and how I grew up. So I grew up as a Catholic. My full name is Marie-Anne Joseph, and my maiden name was Pierre, which is Peter. So, like I tell people, I think my mom wanted a nun. She was very colonized in her religion and not open to spirituality. But there are certain people in certain bloodlines. Priesthood came in on both sides, both on my mother and my father's side. And there is a time in people's life when they have their big cool initiation. It happens around 30s, 40s. And when mine happened, it was full blown. I always was able to do, but I didn't know that it was because I walked with the spirit. So I am called the spirit child. I'm a child of the Gede. So it was like I had to honor the gifts of the spirit. And so in voodoo, we look at death in a whole different concept. And I would like to make sure that I'm honoring that space as well too. It's a time for us to celebrate because we get to go back home. And we're crossed over by the Gede, which I just need to kind of tell you a little bit of history, a little bit, because right now we're pulling the energies of our ancestors with all that is going on. So the island, and I say IET because it means the land of the mountains. And we connect with the earth. So when we do ceremonies, it's all in nature. Even now, it's about walking in the park. I have a tree. It's like going through a bridge so I can go see my ancestors. And all of this is a connection with the Taino Indians that lived in IET. And they lived in a lot of Caribbean islands like Jamaica, Bahamas, Puerto Rico, and others. And Queen Anacana, when Christopher Columbus came in the 1400s, and I'm saying this because I really need to explain like what is being pulled, the energy that's being pulled, and the anger of some of the spirits that represent universal laws. And we call those spirits not angels, we call them laws. And this is what Obari was talking about as being demonized. So when we have a ceremony, if we're calling in our ancestors so we can get information about which herb to use for a certain healing practice, or honoring an ancestor because someone helped someone get to college, and going back and giving them their favorite food at their cemetery. This is a time to give honor to them and ask them, like, what do they need in exchange? Because we don't believe that they're gone. They still walk among us, and we do things to honor them, and by certain colors we wear. So like, purple is for Gede. So these are warriors. So when the African slave trade came in and they started dropping people to the island of Hispaniola or Haiti, depends, where you're coming from to call it, they had the priests and warriors from Dahomey, Senegal, Congo, Benin, Cameroon, and even Madagascar. These were the ones who actually were in the temples. And they mixed with the Taino Indians And that was the Lamaroons who fought for the revolution. So we're talking about warriors that have been being called down in Haiti and all over the Americas. So it's a time that we feel giving liberty is by giving me death, because I would rather die than colonize. And that's what a lot of the people of the Lamaroons, who are now called, Haitian people, that was their concept. So it was always a way to journey to other land, to connect with that power, with our ancestors who did the revolution. This is for me like my daily walk, so I can connect with my ancestors. Any railroad track, I kind of look and just kind of fall into the ethers to connect to them, or looking at a tree, whether it has leaves or not, because we believe that life is always flowing, because life is energy. And we look at different types of religions. Voodoo encompass all types of religions. And from the outer skirts, you think different religions are different, but then towards the core, it's God. We call it bonjour, or the grand maître of life. Voodoo understands that religions are just trying to explain universal laws, and like mentalism, everything is in the mind. So our mind is like our major concept of connecting with our ancestors and knowing that they're still here, but they're in a different form of energy. We have correspondent love, correspondent vibration, but we break it down to each different nations or nations of spirits, and we call them lois, because we connect them to these universal laws. So Gede falls in the universal law of rhythm. There's a rhythm in life. There's a time to give birth, there's a time to live, there's a time to die, but dying is changing temple, so to speak. You're giving up the body, but now you're free and you get to go back home to what the Christians would call heaven, but for us, we call it Genye. And there are certain Gedes who help you cross over, or bring you back so you can help your family members. So we have Baron Samedi, who, when he is called, or the person is, I hate the word possessed, but they are actually mounted by the Loa. You'll find that person wearing glasses, one with a missing eye, so they can connect with both realms. This sunglass part is so they can affect with this realm, the earthly realm, and this is for the spirit. So a person who walks or is mounted by one of the Gedes, you'll see them with glasses like this. You may even see them with a hat, because they want to challenge society norms about everything. They may walk around with a flask of alcohol. They're rude because they're challenging us on our thoughts that is society norms. Or they would say the white man, oh, so you believe this. So they're very vulgar. Some people are very offended by them, but people come so they can connect with this spirit of rhythm to remind us there's a time for everything. And so at funerals with the Gede, they dance, they party, they listen to music, they drink. Ceremonies are very lively. They understand, like, so this is some of the festivals, Fet Gede, and ours is for a month. So I understand how that mindset, this was so hard for me to even accept this part, because a lot of people have demonized voodoo to the point because they don't understand it. And whenever you don't understand something, we say it's wrong. And in voodoo, there's no such thing as, we understand polarity, but it's not like good and evil. It's all. And these are some old pictures from Haiti of and you dress up. It's the giving of color and life that even in death you're partying with your current loved ones who are on this realm and the ones who have crossed over. So I don't know if we have time, I wanted to show you one dance. Now, this is a ceremony to bring harvest, but it's also done with our ancestors as well. So let me see if it will play. So I just wanted to show that's our perspective. It's sometimes when I'm working with my clients as a therapist, I have to put my beliefs to the side because this is a person who views death in a different manner, and supporting them through it. With all that's going on right now, the views of all of us is making almost I see it like a quilt, and we need to come together and kind of brace and understand people's views so we can help one another. I really like what Yara was saying about individuality, like that's what tears us apart. I know in our community, we're thinking about the revolution and how we came from so many different parts of Africa and even from the island itself, and how we came together and we were able to quote unquote, kill our enemies. But right now, we can't view anybody as enemies. We have to come together to kind of understand why we're fearing one another and who put that fear in us in the first place. So thank you.
Wow, no, thank you. That's amazing. As you were describing some of the elements, I just kept thinking about how the goal of all of us saying we got to come together, find common points. It's so easy when you just lay things out next to each other, but the commonalities just are just glaring. Even in the language we use in the Black community around homegoings, um, like we it's already in there. Um, and so, thank you for that. I know some folk have to go. I'm sorry, Denzel, for rushing you, but if people can stay till 7:45 ish, I said 7:30, but this has been too rich to cut anybody off. I do want to ask one thing, Maja, real quick before I had a question each, real quick. You say something about the demonization being um, about a lack of understanding. So people, when they don't understand a thing, they
Yes.
shun it. Do you think that there could be something more intentional about, because everything you described was so powerful. And you talk about
Mhm.
access and power and defeating adversaries. Do you think that there were some deliberateness around knowing it's powerful, understanding it, and because of that, keeping it away from people? Um, and I work with a lot
Yeah,
of young people that just have no conceptualization, they have no framework. They're surrounded with death, and when you ask them how to make sense of it, they just have nothing to like place it on. There's no shelf. It's just overwhelmed with death, with no like understanding of it. And what you described was a very clear framework. Everyone's described clear frameworks, containers to make meaning out of, and that container isn't just for survival, but also for coalescing power. The coming together is all about power. And so I'm curious about how you see the intention behind you having to distance yourself as a counselor from the thing that you know gives people power, but the fear maybe wasn't happenstance, but it was calculated. There's a calculated disconnection because of the power. Have you, I don't know, what you said?
absolutely. I think that whenever whenever there's a possibility for people to be out of control, like
Mm,
that they are able to gain their own empowerment, they don't like it. And when I say
mm,
they, I just say that there's an elite group that would prefer to stay above others. And when they saw what we were able to do, and I'm saying all esoteric type of spirituality, when you get to the core of the matter and know like we're all connected and you're able to feel one another, you're able to read someone, you're able to ignite your spiritual man, that's not something that I can control you with.
Mm-hmm.
Know that knowledge about yourself. I don't want you to know that if you sit quietly and meditate, that you can make changes in your own body. No, I want you to be busy all the time. I want you to be on Instagram, all these different things, and then come pop a pill. So you never really get fully healed. You just continually wear that cast. If I was walking around with a cast for years saying, oh, my arm is broken, you would think something is wrong, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing when people are saying that they're depressed, anxiety, and then just give them a pill. We never get to the core of the matter because we're not talking about the spirit man. And that's what some of that power is at, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I could go on with this. It's
No,
a
that's
very
good.
touchy subject for me, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we should have some time, a little bit of time afterwards. I want to make sure Donzel gets to share his wisdom also. We've been talking a lot about conceptualization and frameworks, but I really appreciate about what you shared last time was giving us some insight into process and to is your work as a therapist, how you have helped guide people through. So the combination of those things I think is most helpful to have a framework, but also to have practices. I'm not sure what you have prepared to share, Donzel, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And you have the floor.
Appreciate that, and thank you everyone for sharing so far. I think to kind of bring everything together, a lot of what my co-presenters um, discussed, I would like to categorize as a form of coping, and really taking a decolonized approach to one's healing, and that's an approach that can take place outside of therapy, but it can also take place in conjunction with therapy. So these are all practices that, while I may not be an expert in, I encourage individuals to pursue on their own, or even explore more in session with me if there's a concept that they are hearing or learning about for the first time. And so for me as a therapist and many other therapists, especially um, therapists from historically oppressed groups, tend to really take a decolonizing mental health approach where we are incorporating aspects of healing and wellness that may not have been taught in the traditional classroom setting. And so in terms of coping, there's a lot of ways in which one could cope. The first thing that you want to make sure you're doing is actually acknowledging and expressing your grief. So again, what my co-panelists expressed are various forms of ways in which you can express your grief and give words for your grief and create meaning for your grief, which is so important. In therapy, you can also do that as well, find ways to create meaning and purpose behind a particular loss. In terms of, in addition to therapy, and a lot of people may not know like what to do, may not know where to begin. And I think this is also where therapy could come in at, because you can learn various forms of coping, like mindfulness and meditation, which is really a fancy way of just increasing one's awareness and acceptance of emotions as they arise. Um, there are creative forms of expression like writing, art, music, that can become another way for you to express your emotions. Especially, I think we don't talk about this enough, but within creative expression, I'd like to use that like as a form of grief as well for a person who may be given a terminal prognosis. So I used to work in oncology and hospice and palliative care. And if I was working with a person who maybe have been given a terminal prognosis, I would really help them find ways to kind of um, make meaning for their end of life. And for some people, particularly for parents, for instance, helping them find ways to like communicate messages to their children at various stages. So sometimes we do recordings, other forms of expression would be like letters to their child, like at a future age. So making birthday cards for like their 18th birthday or like other major milestones. And I think within that, I would also like to mention a resource called the Conversation Project. If you just Google the Conversation Project, that's going to be a really good resource for you to use either for yourself or a loved one who may be experiencing like a terminal condition. To be able to process and outline your wishes or their wishes at the end of life. And this could be a really nice way to kind of navigate some of the logistics that come with grief and loss as well. Sometimes this could avoid and prevent familial conflict if we know the loved one's wishes, their desires. Some common things include cremation versus a burial. So those are like really important conversations to have with a person while they're still here, if you can. And these are also things you can outline for yourself to avoid potential conflict amongst loved ones. But other forms of coping would include things like journaling, physical activity. I'm a huge proponent of phys physical activity. We would call it ecotherapy, what some of the practitioners were describing earlier, in terms of getting connected to water or getting connected to nature. Um, those definitely have healing properties. A huge one that I think we are seeing more of would be um, having a ritual that you would like to do. So this would be a way in which you honor um, your loved one in a meaningful way. I would say that traditionally we see this in a form of funerals. You may have a way, you may have like a visitation. Those are like the traditional forms, but I think some emerging trends would include, but not be limited to things like balloon releases or I think one of the images was showed basically like a, not an altar, but maybe a, just like a meeting place for people to bring like flowers and things. Sometimes creating that in a more informal space outside of a cemetery could be done as well. But some other um, things would include like prayer and meditation and other spiritual practices, no matter like what faith you're in, whether you're in an organized religion or not. Each organized religion has its own form of grieving, and I would encourage individuals to like, if you are affiliated with a religious practice, to really look more into that and to see like how you could like incorporate your faith and spirituality into your grieving as well. I think to conclude with like coping strategies, I would just also encourage folks to engage in everyday like self-care practices to ensure proper rest. And also finding ways to like remember that person can be really helpful. So whether that's looking through pictures and videos, or maybe you're engaging in an activity that this person wants to enjoy, um, choosing a time to honor this person can be really helpful too, whether it's on their birthday or their death date. Um, creating something where or attaching yourself um, to something that would help you memorialize them in a healthy way is accepted. So Dr. O'Brien mentioned um, a loved one having Alzheimer's, and that's like a really good example because for instance, there's the Alzheimer's walk that they have every year to raise funds for research for a cure for Alzheimer's. And so that's something that many people participate in annually to honor that person, but to also like actively fight towards, preventing future losses in that way. I think I'd like to maybe conclude by first and foremost normalizing grief. There was a lot of talk about really just making sure that we don't lose that time to grieve, that we don't try to expedite the process. And so if there's a myth or misconception that I could echo, it would be that grief has no timetable. But that said, I would, from a clinical standpoint, encourage you to also be mindful of signs that you may be progressing forward, but also signs that you may need additional support. And so we've been speaking a lot about our healing from a like an optional standpoint. But I think it's important to recognize that like grief, if not treated, can become something more clinical. One condition that could be is prolonged grief disorder. And so if you, after a year at minimum for adults or 6 months for children and adolescents, if you are experiencing major interference with daily functioning, relationships, and or responsibilities, with some symptoms, including but not limited to like intense longing or being preoccupied with the thought of the deceased, difficulty accepting the loss, emotional numbness or detachment, um, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, hopelessness, loss of meaning or purpose. These are all things that you would want to be mindful of, and that you will want to seek additional help, especially if you already have a pre-existing mental health condition, because a death could exacerbate those symptoms or could cause like a recurrence of a mental health condition that was once treated. So I do think those are things to be mindful of. And that said, I think that's all I kind of wanted to offer and just try to like tie together. But I think everything that everyone shared is really relevant and necessary. And I encourage everyone to definitely look into having discussions with the elders in your family if they're still here, or reviewing artifacts from your family to learn about that familial component of grief too, and encourage everyone to be a change agent in their communities to normalize having these conversations because death is one of the only things that we're certain of. So it's something that, and it's part of life. So I think it's something we should be discussing more frequently. And I guess the last thing that I'll end with is there's a quote to kind of summarize grief that I really love. And this is kind of a paraphrase of the quote, but it's something along the lines of grief is the last act of love. We have to give to those we have loved and lost. And where there is deep grief, there was great love. So I like to kind of conclude with just expressing condolences, but also hoping that everyone can find meaning and purpose and strength behind honoring whomever may have transitioned.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Brother Donzel. Um, thanks for bringing this home for us. I love that you ended with the healing part, but also encouraging us to think about being change agents. Also, one of the things we have not talked specifically about, after death happens, we are tasked with making meaning of it, interpreting it, accepting it. But there are lots of death in this world that is, it's hard to say could not have been prevented because of diet or environmental factors. And so that change agent part where we are creating systems where people are not losing their life to gun violence or mass shootings or intimate partner violence. Those are things that we have a responsibility to prevent also, while we also grieve when it happens outside of our control. So we got a couple minutes if y'all got some time. If anybody has any burning thoughts, it doesn't have to be a Q&A. It could just be a resource to share. Or I think we have Yada for a couple minutes, Aisha maybe for a couple minutes. We're going to end right at 8 o'clock for sure. But we still got folk that are here. If people have anything they would like to share or ask or comment around, I'll open the floor just for a moment. Otherwise, we could also wrap this soon.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was powerful. Powerful.
No, thank you. I mean, while you got the mic, you want to share some of the work you're doing around creating grief tools for the church?
Uh, sure. As I heard, first of all, good evening, everyone. And then I was encouraged to hear so many approaches to this incredibly important topic from an indigenous perspective. I happen to be a Christian pastor who practices a couple of indigenous spiritual practices. And I recognize that Christianity, from my perspective, is indigenous when we take it back from the way the colonizers bastardize it. And so this idea that there are people who are members of the great cloud of witnesses. Those are the ancestors that the Bible is talking about. And so there's something to be said for the work that Dr. Carmen is alluding to. Is I'm creating a grief greeting guide because I'm arguing that when people of African descent um, greet grief in a healthy way, it's actually a source of power. One of the scholars that I'm reading is Malidoma Somé, who talks about how when trauma is visited upon us, it's usually sent from the ancestral realm as either unfinished business or it's a rite of passage that we can use um, to initiate into a higher level of spiritual vibration. And so we're trying to pull some tools together for spirit houses. It's starting off for the church, but for spirit houses to walk people through greeting grief in a healthy way. And so a lot of this information was helpful for me.
Dope. Appreciate you. Um, cool. Anybody else have any final comments or questions or reflections? Otherwise, I am full. This has been rich, and it is also recorded. So if y'all feel like y'all want to share it with anybody else in your world, we will send the link, the recording to everyone who was registered. Um, but let me give a couple seconds in case people are still processing some of this.
I could just add from a resource standpoint, I'll add one more link in the description box or in the chat, but there is a national support group called Grief Share. And I do think that it may have some faith-based components, but I think they welcome everyone from all faiths to participate. They have various chapters and they're offered in person as well as online. I'm not sponsored by them. I don't have any affiliations with them, but I just wanted everyone to also have like something to walk away with. Too. And so I think Grief Share is like a nice support group if maybe you wanted to be in community with other individuals navigating a similar loss. Otherwise, you can always inquire about that with the therapist if you have a therapist or if you're looking for a therapist. There are therapists who specialize in grief counseling or who so
Fantastic.
Hi,
Oh, yes, ma'am.
my name is Sharonda, and I just want to say that I think that the format and
We lost you. Uh-oh, sorry about that.
how they deal with it and the things that they use to cope with.
I'm sorry, Miss Sharonda, your connection is choppy. So if you have something you can type, we can probably get a response to you if it's a question. If it's a resource, please share it in the chat. Um, we got a couple seconds, Miss Yada, or Maja, you have any final statements? We're gonna wrap this up.
For me, I was just saying conversations like this and being open to hearing different practices is actually a healing thing for us as a nation. So I really appreciate this opportunity to hear so many different ways to heal from different traumas that we're dealing with. So this was great. And I just want people to understand that we're not that different. We're all, we're all connected. We're all hurting in some way. So try to think about that. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for this time.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, Barry, I had one quick thing for you. This is April.
Mhm.
Just speaking of the dead, just thank you so much for the opportunity just to sit in to this group. I just wanted to share this one thing about the dead. One of the things that I do with a few different groups is as a reader and as an intuitive uh, prophet. I work with the dead by actually doing readings for people. There's a group called the Angel Mamas, and they do a yearly event for parents who lost their children to gun violence. And one of the things that I do with them is I do readings for them so that they can actually speak to their dead children or even their ancestors. And so this is something we find in a lot of different spiritual communities. It's worldwide where we believe in, prophecy. We believe in being able to communicate, with our ancestors. And so that's another way for those that, are aware of that, getting a reading, actually talking with your ancestors and giving messages that only you would know. So that part has helped, a lot of people in the work that, I've done. And these different kind of modalities, I think, depending who you are with that, can be useful as well. So I know that that's possible from a church background, but also from having African religion, Odu religion, a Buddhist religion, and all that in my background. I know that God can work in many different ways, and that can be very healing as well, so that a person can know that their loved one may be gone, and you may can't see them, but they still exist. I just wanted to share that with you.
Love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for our final word, Yada came back on screen. Give a parting wisdom to leave us with.
Um, yeah, I just wanted to, honestly, it was perfect timing, actually, what Miss April shared. I think just hearing from everybody is very, very healing, in the sense of like everybody's belief system, everybody is right, nobody is wrong. Like if you believe in it, that means that there's something there that has, attached you to this source, this greater power, this divinity that exists within all of us, the same way that atoms make up a human being. There's something in that greater consciousness that we are a part of. So whatever gets you tapped in, gets you tapped in. I just wanted to share this book that I posted in the chat, that really, really helped me. It's about healing the self through understanding the chakras, which is like your energy points through the lens of African spirituality. So I, would love to just kind of leave that, and just say thank you. And I see everybody that has been in this call. Truly, I see you. I love you, as a sister, as a collective. You're all part of this collective. You're all part of this family. So I appreciate you for having me in this space, and much love.
Wonderful. And with that, we are done. Thank you all for coming out. Have a wonderful rest of your evenings. And wish you well on whatever part of the journey that you're on. Until next time.